We are ready for one of people's favorite presentations, and that is from Robert Dean, who is a master sergeant. And yep. Let's go ahead and bring him out, and he can tell his story. So help me welcome Robert Dean.
That's Command Sergeant Major, not Master Sergeant.
Oh, is that what it said? There's your button.
Okay, thank you. You all heard the old joke, I'm sure, about if I knew I was going to be around this long, I would have taken better care of myself. It's not a joke. Believe me, it's not a joke. I'm honored and pleased to be here. Frankly, I never expected to last long enough to be here. But as I said, it's an honor and a pleasure for me because I've been speaking out bluntly, publicly, loudly, rudely, for 20 years on this subject. And it's kind of a special occasion for me because this conference represents for me the 20th year of my speaking publicly and violating my national security oath. I have a poignant feeling in my heart because I had wanted my old friend Wendell Stevens to last long enough to be here for this conference. I had the honor and the privilege of assisting Wendell in putting together the first World Conference in Tucson in 1991. And I spoke to him at Laughlin just last year, and I said, "You old coot, you're going to have to hold on. We need you here for the 20th year celebration." And he said, "Bob, I can't. I'm tired. I've got to go home." And he went home. And I miss him. I'm at that stage in my life where hardly a month goes by where I don't have to say goodbye to somebody. You know, I had to say goodbye to Zechariah Sitchin, a gentleman I learned to love, got to know over the years. I had to say goodbye to Sir Lawrence Gardner, someone else I admired and respected. And as I said, hardly a month goes by where I'm not saying goodbye to somebody. But my son tells me that that's the name of the game, damn it. He said, "You old coot, you hang around 82 years, you have to face that." Well, a week from today, I believe it is, I celebrate 82 years on this planet. I was on the phone with my kid here a few weeks back, and I said, "You know, I feel like a walking example of the old Chinese curse." I think most of you have heard that, you know, "May you live in interesting times." They mean it as a curse, and I thought, you know, I'm a walking example of that. I served and fought in 3 wars. I've had 3 careers, and I've had 3 marriages. Looking back on my second marriage, make that 4 wars. But I'm here this afternoon, and I was having a little discussion with Alejandro about the time. He says, "Well, you got to look at the clock, and when your time is up, you got to leave." And I said, "I'm starting late, so I'm going to continue in speaking beyond the allocated time. You know? I'm not going to give him the same problem that AJ gave him. I've known AJ for years, and getting him off the podium up here is really a chore sometimes. But I do intend to hopefully finish what I came to say, and if I run over a little bit, I guess you guys will back me up here a little, I hope. Anyhow, let's get back to the subject at hand. In 1991, at the First World Conference, I came out of the closet in a big way. I began to violate my national security oath. And I began talking, as I said, loudly, bluntly, and sometimes rudely about a subject that's dear to my heart. And it is essentially, the human race on the planet Earth are not alone, and we have never been alone. From the beginning of human history, we have had what I call an intimate interrelationship with advanced extraterrestrial intelligence from the very beginning of human history. It goes back at least 80,000 years, maybe 100. Zechariah said it goes back 200,000 years. And the essential issue is simply this. The human race is a hybrid race. You guys are hybrids. You are the product of genetic manipulation. You are a product of an advanced extraterrestrial intelligence that literally engineered our genome from a lower form of life into what we are today. And what I want to stress to you is that genetic manipulation is still underway. It's still taking place. It's never stopped. Only in the last few years have we ourselves learned to pluck those golden apples from the tree of life. We're learning now to manipulate our own genome. And we're getting some good help. We've been getting some sound advice from what I refer to as the others. Let me tell you something. The word alien does not apply here. I hate the damn term. I hate the word UFOs, for God's sake. There are no such things as UFOs. We've known for over 60 years what they are. They're not unidentified. We've known what they are. Some of them are ours, some of them are theirs, and some of them are Nazis. But that's another story which I will not get into this afternoon, because there really isn't time for that. But this genetic manipulation has been going on for 100,000 years. We're now learning, as I said, to pluck those golden apples and manipulate our own genome. And the future is literally limitless. The human race is undergoing a very difficult time. I call it a transition, and the analogy I like to use is it's like someone coming through adolescence into adulthood. We are in transit. But more than that, we are involved with what I call a transcendent transformation into a new species. We are literally turning into a new race. And it's not only happening physically, but it's essentially happening spiritually. It's happening within. And you guys here this afternoon are a classic example. When I first started speaking out 20 years ago, and you talk about the things I'm talking about this afternoon, people would look at you, they'd back away from you. Oh my, he's lost it. He's gone over the edge. I have been so gratified at this conference where people have come up to me and given me hugs and kisses and shaken my hand and said, what you've had to say over the last few years means so much to me. Well, what I want you guys to know, the kind, loving words you have given to me means more to me than I could ever tell you. God bless you, and thank you for the love and support that you've given me and the other speakers over the years. You guys make this whole journey worthwhile, and I mean that from my heart. Now, let's try to get back at what we're going to talk about here today. Tomorrow, a friend of mine, a young man who I consider a genius, by the name of Rich Dolan, is going to be talking to you. And Rich is a very rare and special young man. He's a historian. He's written 2 dynamite books called UFOs and the National Security State. Thank you. Volume 3 is supposed to be coming out within a year or so. But in the meantime, he and a friend of his got together and put together another little book, which you ought to buy if you haven't gotten a chance, called AD, After Disclosure. And that book is dynamite. And Rich is a hell of a fine young man, and that book is well worth having in your library. So if you haven't seen it, get with Rich and buy a copy of that damn book. So that leads me into a disclosure of disclosure. Now, I've been having a running battle here for some years with two Stevens, Stephen Greer and Stephen Bassett. And I love them both. They're dear friends. But they've been telling me, it's any minute, Bob, any week, next week, maybe next month, it's going to happen. Oh, disclosure is going to take place. Oh, can't wait, you know. They expect the president to get up in front of an audience at a press conference and say, hey guys, have I got news for you? And the president's going to stand there, you know, under cameras, and everybody's waiting with the little pads and so, writing down. And he's going to tell the big story. Hey guys, it ain't going to happen. Believe me, it ain't going to happen because the story is too damned big. It is not merely that we're being visited by guys from other planets. It isn't merely that we're being visited from guys from other star systems. Nor is it just the fact that people are dropping in from other galaxies. That's a given. And that's true. And, you know, all of the above. When I retired in '76, the Army at the time had just learned that, my God, we're being visited by guys who are popping through portals from other dimensions. Now, if you think that didn't blow their minds. And this was in '76, and that's when I retired from the Army. But that's not the story. They're not visitors. They're not tourists dropping by. They've been here from the very beginning. So I hate the word alien. Many of them have been on this planet before we were here. So the term alien doesn't apply. They've been here from the very beginning. And they're here in mass. There are facilities on this planet where they are all over the damn place. I mean, under Mount Hayes in Alaska, there's a major extraterrestrial facility. Under El Yunque Mountain in Puerto Rico, there's a major extraterrestrial facility. There's one in a mountain in the Pyrenees, its name passes me for a moment here, where there's a major extraterrestrial facility, and there's another facility underground in Australia near a place called Pine Gap. Pine Gap happens to be probably the largest national security facility that we have on the planet. And isn't that a coincidence that right next to Pine Gap, underground, is an alien activity facility? I mean, these guys are all over the damn place. Now, I will tell you, and I'll tell you honestly and bluntly, I have never attended a conference in 20 years. And I've spoken all over the United States. I've spoken all over the planet. Well, I haven't spoken in the Soviet Union, Russia, or China. But damn near everywhere else. I have never been in an audience like this where there wasn't at least one or two extraterrestrial intelligence sitting in the audience. And guys, I will tell you that I've had the opportunity where they've come up and introduced themselves to me after I've made a presentation. Now, if you think that isn't a jarring experience, but you may look around, but, you know, I've had wives looking at their husbands, you know, like, always wondered about this SOB, you know. But let me tell you, they're everywhere. Many of them look just like we do. But I've learned over the years that I've developed a technique, it's a kind of a gut feeling that you develop in your solar plexus here. Ingo Swann gave me some advice on it. Joe McMonigal, another friend who gave me some advice on it. You develop the abilities to recognize them, to sense them. And when they look at you in the face and they look into your eyes, then you know. I spoke at a conference 2 years ago in Laughlin, And after I had finished, I was wandering around with a cup of coffee in my hand, and this good-looking gentleman and a lady came over to me, shook my hand, and said, you know, we appreciate your presentation, and we wanted to thank you for what you had to say, and blah, blah, blah. And we're standing there being friendly and chatting for a few minutes. And I had this gut thing that Ingo was talking about. And I couldn't, you know, it wasn't indigestion or anything. I've developed this sense. I think that's why I've been kept alive. I looked at him and I said, you're not from here, are you? And then I felt a little embarrassed and I said, you know, I mean not from New York or Miami, you know, San Francisco. You guys are not from here, are you? And she chuckled. And I looked at her and she looked at me and she says, no, we're not from here. And I says, would you mind telling me where you're from? And she says, if I were to tell you where we're from, you wouldn't understand. And I didn't take it badly. I mean, I didn't take it as an insult. I really kind of understood what she meant. And that's when I began to conclude that she and he were probably from another dimension. And they do come. They come through portals. They can create a portal just like that. And they come through from other dimensions. And they were a delightful couple. If you looked at them, they did like a husband and wife, you know. He was about my height, and she was a little shorter. And she was fair, blonde hair, blue eyes. He had brown hair and green eyes. You could sit in a restaurant or in an airplane, and you would never know. That's why I tell you, in this audience, there is at least one or two here. And I will tell you something else. They're not interested in what the speakers have to say. They're interested in how the audience responds to what the speakers have to say. They're monitoring us so closely. They're watching us so closely because they are family and they have a concern about the fact that we are undergoing a transition. We are undergoing a painful transformation. As I call it, a transcendent transformation. And I've said this repeatedly over the years, we do indeed have good friends in high places. And you've all heard the stories, we're doomed, they're going to come down and take us over, they're going to invade. Oh God. From the worlds they come from the dimensions they step through from the worlds the lives they live on their worlds, their planets, star systems. This is out in the sticks, guys. They don't want anything we've got, and they're not about to take us over, because if they had wanted to take us over, they could have done it at any time in human history, including last week, if they had wanted to. They don't want to take us over. We are related, we are family. They would like to see us survive as a species, and so would I. And I am gratified when I look out and talk to people like you and I get the response I get from you, where it tells me that there is hope for the human race. In the name of God, we're going to make it. Now, I have this tendency, and I apologize every time I make a presentation. I have to apologize, because I have a tendency to ramble a little bit. But bear with me. I was talking to Bassett and I was talking to Greer, and I keep telling them that don't hold your breath, because Obama is not about to have a press conference and let the big story out. That, bless his heart, that president, I didn't vote for him, but I kind of like the kid. He's sharp. He's a sharp young man. He's got so damn much on his plate right now. He can't deal with this UFO matter. He's dealing with Putin and everybody else over there that's causing us trouble. And Obama's too sharp a young man. He's not about to open this Pandora's box. And that's another analogy I use, analogy. Opening Pandora's box, and many of you, I'm sure most of you, are familiar with the old Greek legend about the young girl Pandora, who was given this box of treasure. But she was also admonished that in that box of treasure were the Furies. But don't open it. He gave it to her, but don't open it. Well, if we open Pandora's box just a little teeny weeny bit, boom, the whole damn thing's going to come out. And the Brookings Report, which was published in 1960 and presented to Congress in 1961, covered it all pretty damn well. Now, I'm going to talk for a brief moment about the Brookings Report. And in doing so, I have to give you a story. I will try to do it without becoming emotional, because just the thinking of the story breaks my heart. Right after World War II, in Papua New Guinea, at an Anglican church mission school in Papua New Guinea. There was a mission school here, and there were the Anglican priests and teachers and all, and they were working with the local people in the villages, the jungles in New Guinea. And there was a young native boy that had attached himself to the mission school. And no one ever knew, really, I guess, how old he was. They thought he was in his teens, early teens perhaps. And this kid just showed up, and he just wouldn't go home, you know. He was half naked, but he hung around the mission school. He was there everywhere. Every time they looked, there he was. His name, his native name, was something like Bilu. They called him Billy. And every time they looked around, he was there. If an errand to be run, he had to carry something, do this, do that. He was always there, and he always said, Billy do, Billy do. And he became like a puppy. And the lady who ran the mission school there kind of adopted him as her puppy. Billy do. If she had something to carry, he carried it for her. Billy do, he said. If she had an errand, he was always there for her. He called her good lady, and she called him Billy do. And they developed an attachment, you know, and it was a lovely, wonderful little story. Until one fine day, the good lady and several other members of the mission school got an idea. They had gotten a hold of the headquarters of the Anglican Church, and they'd gotten some funds. They were going to take Billy do on a trip. They got the money, they were going to take him on a trip, and they were going to show him the white man's world. This kid was so loving, and he never broke a smile. I mean, always smiled, you know. Every time they'd look, he was grinning at them. At night on the porch, when they'd sit around their kerosene lamps talking, they'd look at the end of the porch, and there's his little face looking over the back end of the porch. Billy do was everywhere, like a puppy. Well, anyhow, they got the funds. They got a couple of pairs of pants. They got a couple of khaki shirts. They even got a pair of shoes. They were able to get those shoes on his feet that had never had shoes on in his life. They put the khaki pants on him, the shirts, the shoes. They took Billy do out to the airport, got him on a plane. They were going to fly him out. I think they were originally flying him to Port Moresby. And then they were going to take him over to Australia. Well, they got aboard the plane, and the plane took off, and Billy do peed in his pants. It kind of went downhill from there. They took him to Australia. I believe they took him to Brisbane. They took him to restaurants. They took him to movies. They put him in a hotel room. You know, they showed Billy do all of this. The kids, I can just imagine him wandering around, big-eyed, seeing all of this. From the jungle to Brisbane, movies, restaurants, hotels, showers, bathtubs, all, you know. Well, they were there a week. After a week in Australia, they flew back to New Guinea, went back to Papua. The day after they got back, Billy do disappeared. They found the shirts and the pants neatly folded, the shoes beside them on the porch, and Billy do was gone. They didn't find him for 2 months. They didn't find out what had happened. He had just disappeared. They found him after 2 months. They found his body. He'd starved, died from dehydration. In a jungle where the water runs in the streams and there's fruit and nuts and tubers and all, he literally had starved and died from dehydration in a jungle that you should not have died. They got a hold of the headman of the village, and they tried to ask him, what in the hell happened? What took place here? The headman said, he light not burn very bright. He light go out. And it began to dawn on them what they had done. They had literally destroyed that boy. They had destroyed his worldview. They had destroyed his paradigm. I mean, it collapsed around his little naked knees. And he light go out, as the headman said. And it began to dawn on them what had happened. That they had literally, practically, in a sense, murdered that boy. And it was said that good lady's light didn't burn too bright after that, because it had dawned on her what had happened. And I guess she never got over it. But the story of Billy Dew, that entire incident, was put into the Brookings study that was published in 1961. I think Margaret Mead, who was a member of the Brookings study at that time, had been responsible for putting the Billy Dew story in there. And I use that as an analogy to tell you why I believe that we are not ready en masse all over the world for the true story of who they are, who we are, and our relationship. And the reason I share this story is because what happened to Billy Dew has literally happened to me. Some years back, over this process that I've been going through, my old world paradigm collapsed around my knees. I mean, my old world view just, and that's why the story of Billy Dew touches me so deeply. Luckily, I had friends in high places, and no pun intended, to help me through it. Because what I had been going through and what I had seen, what I had experienced, what I had been shown, literally devastated me and destroyed my old concepts of who I was, where I had come from, how I came to be here, and what my life was all about. So, as my good friend from Galilee used to say, those who have ears to hear, you will hear. And for those of you who have eyes to see, you will see. But I went through a period, guys, where the analogy I use, it's like standing naked alone at night under a billion stars and looking up and crying out, oh God. Who am I? What am I? Why am I here? What's it all about? What's the purpose of my life? Is there a purpose? I went through that. I literally stood naked and alone at night and looked up, and I asked the stars, and what I got from the stars was silence. Now, I use this analogy to tell you that I do believe in the depth of my heart and soul that the masses of people in the world are not ready for the whole story, which is why there is not going to be a press conference by Obama anytime soon, because the masses out there can't deal with it. And the Brookings Report was very clear. Society would be destabilized if the truth were told. There would be a theological impact that would be devastating. And then he even concluded that one of the most groups of professionals to be devastated would be the scientific community. And it was a study that was very, very well done, and they concluded in 61 that if we were to ever meet develop a relationship with advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, should we tell the masses out there? And the conclusion was no. Now, it didn't say that I can remember when they might decide that the time would come where they could share it with the masses out there. But you guys read your papers and you read your magazines and you watch television and you know what's going on in the world. My God, the Shiites and the Sunnis are butchering each other. Everybody in the Middle East wants to butcher the Israelis. And they're butchering here and there and, No, the world isn't ready for this story yet. Guys like you probably can deal with it. But the masses can't. And that's why I tell Stephen Bassett and Greer and anybody else who talks to me about there's going to be a press conference next month, don't hold your breath, guys. The story is too damn big, and it's going to take time for people to get ready for this. Well, let me tell you what I do believe is happening. A form of disclosure is underway, and it's been underway now for at least 20 years. And it's known, or what I call it a form of subliminal education. And it's taking place every day. Movies, television, books, magazine articles, conferences like this. There's a form of disclosure taking place. Now, the cynics back in Langley, where the CIA is, refer to it as psychotronic persuasion. And those cynics, they're convinced that you guys can be manipulated into doing anything. They can make you buy the car they want you to buy. They can make you buy the box of cereal they want you to have. They can make you do damn near anything with psychotronic persuasion. Well, the disclosure that I have perceived and I know is underway is what I call subliminal education. And it's underway, and we can take another Stephen, not Greer or Bassett, but there's a guy in Hollywood, Spielberg, who I think has been a major part of this disclosure matter for some years now. What has he made a movie, E.T.? He made a movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He put together a television series called Taken. E.T. was for the kids. Close Encounters was for the big kids. The series called Taken was for the adults. Every time I turn around, I see a movie of some kind. Even the second remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still. I look at the credits. Steven Spielberg. And he's been a part of this disclosure matter. Now, I'd love to get him aside sometime. I did this with Chris Carter a number of years ago. I got him after a couple of drinks after a party and accused him of being a part of the inside disclosure thing, and all I got from Chris Carter was a big grin and say, "Stay tuned, you ain't seen nothing yet." Well, I'm sure Spielberg is doing the same thing. Rumor has it that he and Reagan had a chat when I think the Close Encounters of the Third Kind were shown. And Reagan said to him, he says, "There's only about 3 people in this room who know how true all that is." So it's been underway. You're all being disclosed to. You're all being prepared. You're all getting that subliminal education. So, no, there's not going to be a press conference. Yes, there is a form of disclosure taking place, and you're all a part of it. But I have a couple of things I want to share with you. There's a couple of quotes that I want to share with you to let you know that this so-called disclosure has been underway for quite a while. One of my great heroes was a man some years ago by the name of Charles Fort. Now, I was trained in the military to be an intelligence analyst. And I say that Charles Fort was one of the first and one of the best intelligence analysts we've ever had. Charles died about 3 years after I was born. But Charles Fort, being an incredibly bright man, gathered data and facts. And you know, they even developed, they call it the Fortean Society in his name. And he wrote a series of books on his disclosures and what he had learned. And I want to quote you something Charles Fort said some years ago. He says, "It's the cold, hard data that confronts us. There are facts we cannot deny. I think we are property. I believe that someone or something owns us. The planet is owned by someone else." Charles Fort said that in 1925. So it's why intelligence analysts like myself appreciate the man and respected him. It's amazing how accurate he was in some of his disclosures. Okay, there's another quote that I want to run by you. Now, this one is from our favorite Nazi, Wernher von Braun. Werner said in 1959, and this was quoted and published in the Chicago newspaper, "We find ourselves faced by powers which are far stronger than we had hitherto assumed, and whose base is at present unknown to us. I cannot say more at present, but we are now engaged in entering into closer contact with these powers." Now, Werner said that in 59. Interestingly enough, 5 years after an incident took place at Muroc Air Force Base in California, attended by the President of the United States, old Ike Eisenhower, where Ike and a whole party of different people flew out there at Muroc, which is now called Edwards. And what was the big party all about? Well, they had a face-to-face meeting for 3 days with those guys, the Anunnaki. I use the term Anunnaki in a generic sense because according to Zechariah, it's simply a translation of an old Sumerian term, those who came down from above. Those from heaven to earth came. Well, a group of them from heaven to earth came at Muroc Air Force Base in 59, met Ike and a whole bunch of people, and they went for 3 days. Now, that was 54, and Werner makes his statement in 59. Oh, a coincidence, of course. Now, there's another one here. I want to run this by you and let you know that this process has been going on for quite a while. Dr. Professor Hermann Oberth, 1980, a good friend of von Braun, one of the top rocket scientists on the planet, another German, the genius, Hermann Oberth. He said, "We cannot take the credit for our record advancement in certain scientific fields alone. We have been helped by people from other worlds." Now, Oberth was an internationally known scientist, and that was published in several United States newspapers. I got another one here. This is a good zinger. In 1971, Professor Fred Hoyle, world-famous British astrophysicist in London, quote, appeared in the London newspaper, "Human beings are simply pawns in a game of alien minds that control our every move. They are everywhere, in the sky, on the sea, and all over the earth. It is not just an alien intelligence from another planet or another star system, but it is actually from another universe," which I suspect he probably meant another dimension, "which from our very beginning has been controlling all that is happening on planet Earth to the human race, and it's been controlling it ever since." What a bit of insight that is. Now, I have to run this by you because this is another little tidbit that fits into this picture. Wendell and I put on a conference in Phoenix here a number of years ago, 1993, not 2 years after I came out of the closet, so to speak. And one of the speakers we got a hold of was a retired NASA scientist by the name of Professor David Froning. Now, David Froning had worked almost 30 years with NASA and McDonnell Douglas. And during his presentation in Phoenix in 1993, David Froning said, "We have had hyperluminal flight capability for the past 30 years. And then Wendell and I both said, "Wait a minute, hold it. David, hyperluminal flight?" And he smiled and said, "Yes, we've had it for 30 years. And he was one top scientist at McDonnell Douglas. He said, "We have been using transluminal flight since 1960. We are using a modified field propulsion system utilizing exotic field tension through matter-antimatter conversion that actually modifies time and space. We can literally create a variable field around the craft that completely insulates the craft and anyone inside of it from the space-time and regular limits of inertia and gravity, if inertia have no effect whatsoever on the crew or anything inside the craft." Hyperluminal flight. David Froning, retired from McDonnell Douglas, 1993. Here we have another little tidbit which fits into this picture. Aerospace engineer and director of the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works in 1995 on his retirement, Ben Rich. And he must have had a hell of a sense of humor. Ben's gone home now. I'd love to have met the man, but he must have had a hell of a sense of humor. He says, "Most of what you have seen on Star Trek is actually quite commonplace. Classified aerospace science is at least 100 years beyond establishment mainstream science." And then he threw out a little jest. He says, "Now we can now take E.T. home." Now that was about the time of the movie, I believe, when E.T. was out there. And remember, those of you who saw it, the little dude was always wanting to, E.T. go home, wanted to find a way to get home. Ben Rich says, "We can take E.T. home." If you have seen it on Star Trek, we have it. We can do it. Now, either Ben Rich or David Froning, either one of them, were stark raving maniacs, or these guys knew what the hell they were talking about. Well, I can tell you that the research I've done and the people I've talked to and the material I've collected in the last 20 years tells me that Ben Rich, David Froning, they knew damn well what they were talking about. Because, guys, there is an entire world of science and reality in this country, on this planet, that most people haven't a clue about what it's all about. You see in the news, NASA. Oh, I dislike that name. What is it Richard Hoagland said? Never a straight answer? Richard Hoagland has a sense of humor, too. NASA says, we're not going back to the moon, guys. We can't afford it. Bullshit. I'm sorry, ladies. Pardon me. Balderdash. Okay. We can't go back to the moon. We can't afford it. Blah, 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 blah. Within an hour, I believe, one of our shuttles is due to take off. The damn thing has a robot on board. Did you know that? They have a crew member on the shuttle that's due to lift off within an hour, and they have a robot on the board that looks like a human being. Now think about that. But now we're going to do away with the shuttle program. This is the last flight of this particular shuttle. We'll not do that again. Before the end of the year, they're going to fly the other one, and that's going to be the last of that. We're not going back to the moon. We're going to dispense with the shuttle program. What the hell are we going to do? We're going to sit and twiddle our thumbs and let the Chinese take over the whole thing? No, we're not, because we've already done it, and they haven't told you about it. Now, you've paid for it. Every time April 15th comes around, you guys get fleeced. You know, you're like a little flock of sheep. You line up and they fleece you every April 15th, and you pay for it. Well, let me tell you guys, I want to give you one more quote here. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but anyhow. At a statement during a conference in 1987, a senator from Hawaii, Daniel Inouye. I think he's still a senator from Hawaii. Daniel Inouye, in a statement at a hearing, he said, apparently there exists a shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, and its own fundraising mechanisms, and its own ability to pursue its own ideas on the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and obviously free from the law itself. Senator Inouye was touching a nerve there. A shadow government. Who would believe that? And again, I said, how the hell are they paying for it? Well, let me just tickle your memory just a little bit here. Many of you probably remember this. In the year 1998, 1999, and the year 2000, the General Accounting Office made a statement. We seem to have misplaced, we cannot find something like $1.7 trillion a year for 3 years in a row. Now, you would have thought, I would have thought, when that statement was made, I didn't see it, but it was in the newspapers apparently, 1.7 trillion a year, 3 years in a row? Did Congress erupt in outrage? Did anybody yell and scream and start demanding accountability? Where the hell is that money gone? No, they didn't. That bunch of clowns that called themselves a Congress back there didn't address that at all. 1.7 trillion a year for 3 years. Now that's what one of the old senators years ago said, you know, $1 million here and $1 million there, and now you'll be end up talking about real money. Well, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and now we're talking about $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there. Well, where the hell did those trillions go? Well, could it possibly be that they went to a separate space program? Well, they did, apparently. Apparently, guys, we do have a separate space program, which is why NASA is not going back to the moon, why NASA is getting rid of the shuttle program, because we have something known as the United States Aerospace Command, commanded by a 4-star general by the name of Lance Lord. Interesting name, that. You know, I wonder if Lance might happen to be one of them guys. Lance Lord, 4-star Air Force general, Aerospace Command. Well, let me tell you, we're not going back to the moon. We've already gone back to the moon. We're not going to Mars because we've gone to Mars. The trillions of dollars that they cannot account for in our Aerospace Command, which happens to be a multinational organization. There are Brits, Australians, Canadians, Americans, Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines. The Aerospace Command apparently has platforms in orbit, apparently has ships in orbit. And going back to what Ben Rich said and going back to what David Froning said, we've had 0-point energy for 40 years. We've had hyperluminal flight for 40 years, and this was in 93, excuse me. So you put all the pieces together. If Charles Fort were here, he'd say, it's obvious. Here's the story here. Well, I'm here representing Charles this afternoon, and I will tell you that the bits and pieces come together, they fit together, and when you put this puzzle together, you get a picture. And it's an incredible picture. We are way the hell ahead of everybody, including ourselves. And we're paying for it with missing trillions, and you guys are paying for it. I hope you enjoy that. But you're not going to know about the Aerospace Command and its capabilities unless you happen to talk to Gary McKinnon, the young man from England who hacked into NASA and the Defense Department and came up with some really sensitive information. And if you followed the story, they're trying to get Gary McKinnon's little ass over here so we can put him in jail for 50 years. He's a sharp young man in the United Kingdom who is apparently a computer genius. And he hacked into NASA and the Defense Department, and he came up with information about our Space Command headquarters. He found information indicated that we have vessels in orbit out there where they had orders transferring commands from one vessel to another, and none of those vessels appear on our property list for the Navy or anywhere else. So we apparently have a separate command out there, and we've got hyperluminal vessels in orbit. And I had this nagging feeling that maybe Lance Lord's headquarters is not at Colorado Springs where it's supposed to be. It's probably out there in orbit. I say, well, hell of a tale, isn't it? When you start putting it all together and you realize you've been conned. And if you get like me, you really get pissed off. You know, I'm an old command sergeant major, and I don't have a lot of patience about being conned. It was part of my job when I was still on active duty. Now let's get back with what little time we have left here. The question would come up, who the hell are these guys? Really, who are they? Our ancestors called them, get these words, controllers, protectors, gardeners, emissaries, watchers, angels, messengers, guardians, monitors, recorders, the builders. That's what your ancestors and mine called them. Who are they actually? Well, why are they here? The list I put together is we're being analyzed, surveyed, observed, monitored, guided, closely watched, weighed, evaluated, examined, tested, encouraged, nourished, and nurtured. Who's doing the job? Well, there's a professional group of biologists, anthropologists, chemists, psychologists, philosophers, geneticists, linguists, geologists, zoologists, oceanographers, meteorologists, and volcanologists. Okay. I show these pictures because that's part of the neighborhood you live in. I love to look at those pictures. That literally is the neighborhood you're part of. That one particularly, I'm thinking of the latest estimates, 200 billion stars in our galaxy, 200 billion galaxies in the universe. The latest estimates that almost every star has planets. The latest modest estimate was that there are probably 10 million planets with advanced intelligence out there. But those pictures are beautiful. Oh, okay, let me get back here. Now this is from the horse's mouth. Forgive the term. I've been told flatly by one of them that beautiful lady, which our ancestors called Gaia, a goddess, they believed that she was alive. Our ancestors worshiped her. I almost reached that point myself. She has a circulatory system. She has a she has a respiratory system, a circulatory system, and God bless it, she has a heart. That beautiful lady is alive. But that beautiful lady is regarded by them as probably the ripest and richest zoological garden in this quadrant of the galaxy. They venerate her because of what she is. The ripest and the richest zoological garden in this quadrant of the galaxy. They conclude that the flora and fauna on this beautiful garden is literally infinite. The flora and the fauna is infinite in its variety. And people say, what are you talking about? I said, well, flora, the fauna, you know what the words mean. We have an audience here filled with fauna. You guys are fauna, and I notice there's some flora here too, but I won't get into that. Infinite variety of flora and fauna on this beautiful garden. And someone said to me one time, "Are you telling me I'm living in a zoo?" And I'm saying, "You damn right you're living in a zoo. You're one of the more precious animals in that zoo. So behave yourself, you know. As fauna, do what fauna is supposed to do." Well, apparently we are. We're beating the hell out of each other, going to war with each other. You ever watch a monkey cage? You got the rhesus over here, you got the chimps over here, you got, oh God, you got some baboons over there. Listen, guys, you're fauna, whether you like it or not. So, I tell people, get your damned act together. Okay, now in the time I have left, I want to give you some photographs from NASA, which NASA refuses to even admit that they had. These things came really from the Japanese Space Agency, who were kind enough to give me copies after NASA admitted that they had inadvertently, mistakenly erased 40 rolls of film. You remember that? Hit the newspapers. About the time we were celebrating landing on the moon 2 years ago, NASA admitted that they had inadvertently and mistakenly destroyed 40 rolls of film. What do you suppose were on those rolls of film? NASA must have forgotten that they had a contract with the Japanese Space Agency for years, and the Japs bought every damn copy they could get a hold of, and NASA forgot it. And when they said they had erased and inadvertently and destroyed all these films, the Japanese have them. And this is a NASA photograph. Apollo 12. Get this damn thing to work here. Put a battery in it. There we go. Apollo 12, roll 12, 51, negative number, 8553 or something there. This was a picture taken on the way to the moon. And the guys were in their little capsule on the way to the moon, that little tiny thing, you know, 3 of them crammed in there. And they're up in the windows snapping pictures. Well, I'm thinking guys in this thing are snapping pictures of the guys inside the capsule. And we've actually had cases where the guys have looked out of their windows and seen guys in windows in other ships looking back at them. Okay. This is a facility in a crater on the backside of the moon. And it's gigantic. It's part of the major construction going on there. And they're all over the damn place. I mean, they've got what looks like cities in craters on the other side of the moon. They've got facilities on this side of the moon, but they won't release the pictures. They're all over the damn place. Okay. Here's another one. Something here. Major. This is on the backside. They don't want to let that stuff out. Maybe this thing needs a new battery like me. Here's a NASA photograph, AS-14. Roll 70, negative number, what is it? 8837 or something like that. Now, this line was an artificial line drawn by some guy who put the picture together, but here's the ship. They were photographing this crater here because there's a major facility in the bottom of the crater. And while they were photographing this crater, this thing flew by, and somebody in the capsule took a picture of it. And here's the other one. This one was taken by Neil Armstrong, I believe. Guys, there's heavy traffic out there. There's not one flight that has ever gone on the Apollo program. Okay, here's one. This is Apollo 13 on their way to the moon. Now this is a good size object here. Looks like a disc with a dome on top, and it's good size. I imagine several hundred feet. Here's another one. But coming in on the edge of this particular photo here, this is the first of the 2 that I got from the Japanese, is something very, very unusual. Here's the next picture, and here is that big mother moving into the center of the field here. Guys, they estimated that big mother was 5 miles long. Now, here we are. This is the positive, this is the negative. This thing is 5 miles long. Now, stop for a moment and consider the kind of technology, the kind of civilization, the kind of a culture that can build and put in orbit something 5 miles long. That's one of the reasons why they're not going to lift the lid on this damn thing anytime soon, because they don't know how to tell you about that civilization, about that culture, about the technology that can do that. Here we are again. I spent some time with my son over the years. He was a career naval officer, and I was able to go on aircraft carriers with him, Nimitz-class carriers. Many of you have seen them, I suspect. A Nimitz-class carrier is nuclear-powered, only has to fuel up once every 15 years or something like that. 1,000 feet long, they have a crew of over 5,000 men on one of our Nimitz-class carriers. Can you imagine what it might be like aboard a ship of that size, 5 miles long, the crew, what they're doing there? Well, and several of us who put together some of this information over the years said that we suspect that probably one of their more entertaining pastimes is watching human television. I watch a couple of programs once in a while. I can't really stand TV very often, but once in a while, just of a sense of perversity, I'll turn it on, and I'll watch something like Dancing with the Stars. But I turn the volume down. I turn the volume off so I don't hear the music, and I can just watch the monkeys up there going through their thing. Well, I've been told that those guys out there, that's one of their favorite pastimes, watching human television. They're probably rolling in the aisles on those big mothers out there, watching human TV, Dancing with the Stars. God. Okay. Now here we are, what I call the piece de resistance. I was privileged some years ago to make friends with a retired NASA scientist by the name of Norman Berggren. Norman worked for NASA about 30 years. Brilliant, wonderful little guy. He's about that tall. Pink-cheeked. He was 88, 89 a couple years ago when I was with him at the Bay Area conference at San Jose. Norman worked for NASA before it was even NASA. That's how long he'd been in the program. And he said that in the late 70s, American astronomers had discovered that there was something strange going on in Saturn. They had detected some anomalies going on in the rings of Saturn. So they had been putting together this little spacecraft called Voyager 1, which is still out there somewhere. And I think Voyager 1 was the one that carried the little gold disc with the message to those guys out there. And I imagine they thought that was rather humorous. But as Voyager 1 was going out, NASA directed it through the rings of Saturn, near the rings of Saturn, to take a series of photographs. I don't think they quite realized what they were going to get. Well, they got this one. Here's one of the rings here. And this baby is about the size of our moon. It's artificial, self-luminous, moves all over the damn place, and apparently it's a construct. I mean, it's a vehicle of some kind, but it's the size of our moon. Now, this is the other. Now, Norman kept thinking that eventually NASA was going to release this material. And he waited and waited and waited, and they didn't. So Norman retired, took a few of those photographs with him and wrote a book about it. And he tried to get it published in the United States, and nobody would touch it. No American publisher would even get near it. So old Berggren goes off to Scotland, I think Aberdeen. He was able to get a publisher who published his book called the Ring Makers of Saturn. And Norman was convinced, as another bunch of other guys at NASA, that these guys out there were making the rings. And I said, you know, maybe they are, but have you stopped to realize that maybe they're mining the rings? Well, anyhow, this is one of the rings here. But what is this? That, according to NASA and Norman Berggren, is what they call an electromagnetic vehicle. It's a construct, it's an artificially constructed vehicle, and that baby is 2,000 miles long. Now, another piece of the puzzle that our government doesn't want you to know, because they don't know how to tell you. They don't think you could deal with it. They think the idea, if you had to confront the fact that there's a technology in our midst that can do that, how would they explain that? I mean, here we are with these little capsules and this little shuttle. Shuttle has, 7 guys on board? We managed to murder about 14 of them over the last few years. The capsules, the shuttles, and you look at them, and you look at something like that. Well, I can understand why the powers that be, the authorities, don't want you to know, because they don't know how to tell you. They think that if you had to confront a reality that there is a technology in our midst that can do that you couldn't handle it. Well, I disagree. I think you can handle it. And you are going to have to face the reality. You're going to have to face handling it, whether you like it or not, eventually, because they're all over the damn place. They're in your midst. A couple of them are here. I feel it in my gut. Don't start looking around at each other. I've had a couple of friends tell me, and I look at one here in the second row, who said, if you spot one, you're going to have to tell me about it. Introduce me. Well, Cookie, I don't think I can do that, babe. Anyhow, guys, I have rambled for the last hour and 15 minutes over a whole lot of information. And I've only touched the tip of the iceberg, as it were. Summarizing back, I'll get back tell you that we're not alone. We've never been alone, that we are hybrids. We are members of a family of intelligent life that literally permeates the universe. Latest estimate that there are 10 million planets with advanced intelligence. I think somebody just a day or two ago, maybe it was your son, mentioned that this figure now is over 1,000 planets they've discovered. So, stay tuned, as Chris Carter said. You ain't seen nothing yet. But you guys can take a breath of relief and relax, because you guys can deal with it. But there are a lot of people out there who can't. And sadly enough, some of the people who can't deal with it are some of our scientists, some of our politicians. At conferences, I've talked to some, and I've confronted them, and I've had them put their hands out like this. They didn't even want to hear what I had to say. And they sure as hell wouldn't attend a conference like this. Stanton Friedman, a man I deeply respect, you'll hear his presentation, I'm sure. He had an experience not too long ago with a guy by the name of Seth Shostak, who is the lead scientist with the SETI program. And you're all familiar with what SETI is, that these guys are sitting in front of their little radios listening, tuning their little dials, listening, waiting to hear words or something from out there, as if those guys out there are still using radio, And here they are. Anyhow, Stanton got into this discussion with Seth Shostak, who's not a stupid man. Seth is I've never met him, but I imagine he's a delightful guy to be around. Stanton said, have you ever looked, Seth, at the data? Have you ever looked at the evidence? Have you ever bothered to look at it? And Shostak said, no, I haven't. And Stanton, being the sharp little cookie that he is, said, well, if I get a wheelbarrow and I get it filled up with data and evidence and facts and material, and I give it to you free of charge, will you even look at it? And so Seth Shostak said, probably not. And Stanton just sort of walked away shaking his head. I understand that because I've had experiences like that myself. I spoke at a conference, or I did speak at a conference. I was invited to speak at the University of Arizona a number of years ago. The auditorium was packed. The kids loved it. The faculty wanted to burn me at the stake. They wouldn't allow my sponsor to invite me back. But the kids wanted me to back again, for photos and more material. But the faculty said, no, no, no. And that's the problem we're facing. Listen, guys, I've rambled and I've shown you some pictures and I've quoted some information for you, and I think you grasp what I've been trying to communicate here. I've had personal experiences. I gave Carrie Cassidy an interview last year at Laughlin during this conference, where I came out of the closet in a big way, so to speak. Figure of speech. And I admitted that I have had a relationship with non-human intelligence since I was 2.5 years old. And I did it because a friend of mine in New Mexico, Neil Freer, retired writer, educator, had the courage to publish a white paper some years back where he had had a relationship with them since he had been 7. And Neil had the guts to come out and admit that he had had this relationship with non-human intelligence. And I thought, well, bless his heart, if Neil can do it, I can do it. And so I gave Carrie Cassidy this interview last year, which she promptly put on the damn web. I'm all over, what is it, YouTube or something? I don't own a computer, guys, so I don't know anything about that. Cookie here, a good friend, brought me up on the computer here about a year ago. And I'm all over the damn place. And it's a shock to me because I never realized the impact of that science. But anyhow, I came out of the closet and admitted that I've had this personal relationship. And I admitted to you this afternoon that it literally killed me. It really almost did, because I lost my paradigm, my old worldview collapsed. I was like Billy Doo. I damn near died psychologically, psychically. But I'm here and I'm alive and I survived it. And I've admitted to you my involvement with them. And I've shared a couple of little tidbits that I've gotten from my relationship with them. And in closing, I want to say this to you. You really have nothing to fear. There are going to be some things happening on this planet in the next few years that are going to be pretty horrendous. They're essentially going to be geological. We're going to have a lot of earthquakes. We're going to have a lot of volcanoes erupting. We're going to have some tidal waves. We're going to have some terrible losses of life. And it's not going to be a difficult path to walk, but humans have walked those paths before. And I want to leave you with a quote that means a great deal to me. One of my favorite writers, philosophers, was Count Leo Tolstoy. And Leo Tolstoy said, there is something in the human spirit that will survive and prevail. He said, there is a tiny and brilliant light burning in the heart of man that will not go out, no matter how dark the world becomes. And in the spirit of that light, that spark, that light of pure divinity that burns deep within each and every one of your hearts, I want to say to you, thank you, God bless you, and good afternoon.